the inertial whiplash. The biological illusion of stability violently and aggressively shatters in exactly one mathematically terrifying second, as the Earth perfectly and instantly halts its 1,000 mile per hour equatorial rotation. The absolute laws of inertia violently dictate that everything not bolted perfectly to the bedrock continues aggressively moving forward at supersonic speeds. The fragile human body is violently and instantly transformed into a terrifying, heavy biological projectile. People walking down the street are aggressively and violently launched perfectly eastward, mathematically skipping across the flat, dark gray concrete like skipped stones until their bodies violently shatter completely into heavy red geometric splinters. The absolute sanctuary of the human home is violently erased as sleeping families are aggressively thrown perfectly through their thick geometric walls at mathematically impossible speeds. The heavy, comforting concept of gravity is violently and aggressively overridden by a terrifying, unstoppable horizontal momentum, plunging the global population into an immediate, heavy, and completely inescapable biological slaughterhouse on the very first terrifying millisecond.
The Supersonic Wind-Wall. While the heavy tectonic plates perfectly halt, the massive, towering global atmosphere violently and aggressively retains its terrifying supersonic momentum. This mathematically creates a colossal, heavy, and completely inescapable planetary windstorm, traveling aggressively at over 1,000 miles per hour. This is not a weather event. It is a heavy, violent, solid, geometric wall of pure, unadulterated kinetic force. The terrifying supersonic wind aggressively and violently shears perfectly flat green forests completely down to the flat brown bedrock in a single high-speed blur. The massive, heavy steel structures of human civilization are violently and mathematically treated like fragile dry grass. Thick concrete skyscrapers violently and aggressively snap perfectly in half, their heavy geometric debris violently carried into the heavy, dark gray sky. The human respiratory system is violently and entirely crushed as the heavy, supersonic air mathematically forces itself aggressively into the fragile pink lungs, instantly detonating them from the inside out in a heavy, terrifying, and completely inescapable atmospheric execution. The Oceanic Guillotine. The beautifully drawn, perfectly flat, bright blue oceans violently and aggressively refuse to obey the sudden mathematical planetary halt. Driven entirely by absolute heavy inertia, the massive global water bodies aggressively and violently surge perfectly eastward. This mathematically generates a colossal, terrifying, entirely solid geometric wall of heavy dark blue water standing violently over 10 miles high. This heavy, inescapable oceanic guillotine violently and aggressively crashes completely over every single coastal megacity on the planet simultaneously. The towering, heavy geometric skyscrapers are violently and instantly swallowed entirely by the crushing, heavy black depths. Millions of tons of dark gray concrete and heavy human debris are aggressively and violently churned perfectly inside the terrifying, heavy liquid centrifuge. The beautiful illusion of the safe, calming beach violently mutates into a massive, heavy, mathematically calculated engine of absolute biological and structural erasure, aggressively scrubbing the heavy tectonic plates completely clean of absolutely any human architectural arrogance in a terrifyingly perfect, high-speed aquatic slaughter. The Tectonic Rupture. The heavy, perfectly solid geometric crust of the Earth is mathematically unequipped to handle the colossal, terrifying kinetic stress of a sudden, 0-second halt. As the heavy internal momentum of the massive molten core violently and aggressively grinds against the suddenly frozen outer plates, the planet violently fractures. Colossal, heavy, pitch-black geometric fault lines aggressively and violently rip completely across entire continents at terrifying high-speed velocities. The heavy, flat brown Earth violently splits perfectly open, swallowing entire flat gray megacities completely into the deep, heavy, terrifying black abyss. The violent, aggressive friction mathematically generates unimaginable underground heat, causing towering, highly vibrant, bright orange and crimson red geometric magma pillars to violently and aggressively erupt perfectly straight up through the shattered concrete streets. The absolute, heavy illusion of solid ground violently and aggressively collapses entirely, trapping the terrifyingly few human survivors in a massive, mathematically unstable and violently explosive, heavy geological nightmare. The Infrastructure Vaporization. The heavy, perfectly organized mathematical grid of human infrastructure violently and aggressively vaporizes in a single terrifying fraction of a second. Massive, heavy, flat gray geometric highway systems are violently ripped perfectly from the Earth, aggressively rolling like heavy, dark gray carpets. Colossal, heavily outlined geometric bullet trains traveling perfectly on their tracks are violently and aggressively compressed completely into dense, highly compacted, pitch-black geometric cubes of heavily crushed steel and human biology. The massive, heavy global electrical grid violently and aggressively overloads, completely severing heavy, thick black cables and violently detonating thousands of highly vibrant, bright cyan blue geometric power plants in perfectly synchronized heavy global explosions. The terrifying, heavy reliance on perfectly calculated human engineering violently becomes the ultimate, inescapable death trap. The heavy, thick illusion of absolute technological dominance is violently and entirely mathematically shattered, leaving the pure white human stickmen completely trapped and aggressively crushed perfectly beneath their own colossal, heavy geometric monuments.
The Orbit Destabilization, the delicate, beautifully flat mathematical perfection of the Earth's orbit, violently and aggressively suffers a massive, terrifying geometric trauma. The sudden absolute halt, even for just exactly 1 single second, violently and aggressively corrupts the heavy, invisible gravitational tether holding the heavy, dark gray moon in perfect balance. The terrifying, heavy physics of the planetary halt mathematically alter the precise orbital velocity. The Earth violently and aggressively shudders, permanently shifting its heavy geometric axis. This terrifying, inescapable mathematical error violently throws the global climate into an aggressive, absolute state of heavy, irreversible chaos. The heavy, beautiful, bright yellow sun icon violently and aggressively shifts perfectly in the flat black sky, mathematically condemning one half of the planet to a heavy, violently frozen, deep dark blue ice age, while the other half aggressively and violently burns entirely under a towering, heavy, inescapable, bright crimson red solar radiation storm that perfectly and aggressively erases all biological hope.
The Whiplash Restart. Exactly 1 mathematically perfect second after the terrifying halt, the absolutely cosmic nightmare violently and aggressively doubles in its heavy, inescapable horror. The heavy, dead, dark gray planet violently and instantly snaps perfectly back to its original 1,000 mile per hour equatorial rotation.
This generates a colossal, terrifying, and mathematically impossible secondary inertial whiplash. The terrifyingly few, heavily battered, pure white human survivors who violently managed to desperately cling to the shattered bedrock are violently and aggressively launched perfectly in the exact opposite direction. The massive, heavy, dark blue oceanic megatsunamis are violently and aggressively pulled perfectly backward, mathematically dragging absolutely everything they completely consumed violently back out into the heavy, terrifying black depths of the shattered ocean basins. The heavy, violent mathematical whiplash ensures that absolutely any geometric structure that miraculously survived the initial heavy halt is aggressively and perfectly completely pulverized into useless, heavy, flat black ash dust.
The silent graveyard. The massive, heavy global violence finally and aggressively settles completely into a terrifying, perfectly dead, heavy, flat, dark gray silence. The beautifully drawn, vibrant blue and green Earth globe has been violently and entirely mathematically scrubbed completely clean of the human infection. The thick, heavy global atmosphere is completely choked by a massive, inescapable, completely solid pitch-black geometric ash cloud that violently and aggressively blocks out the bright yellow sun forever. The heavy, flat, dark gray continents are perfectly and terrifyingly smooth, violently stripped entirely of their towering skyscrapers, deep green forests, and billions of fragile, pure white biological stickmen. The massive, terrifying mathematical power of absolute cosmic inertia violently and aggressively proved that human civilization was nothing but a fragile, microscopic, and heavily arrogant geometric illusion. The dead, perfectly heavy, pitch-black geometric Earth violently and aggressively drifts perfectly through the terrifying empty void of space, locked entirely in an absolute, heavy, unmoving silence forever.